right. Hi, guys, and welcome back to episode 13 of the Seeking Truth podcast. Today's episode is all about striving versus abiding in God. And we're really going to break in particular, into John 15 in this podcast. So if you have a Bible, if you have your phone, why don't you pull up John 15? And we're really going to break that down today. This is a message that God's been speaking to me about for a long time. And I think just getting more and more information and more revelation every time I kind of revisit this chapter. And so I really want to share that with you guys today and hopefully encourage you guys and reveal some stuff that maybe you haven't thought about before, you weren't aware about with this passage. And hopefully God can speak to you through this as well. So John 15 is all about Jesus, and he's talking to the disciples, and he's talking about how he's the true vine and he's the vine and we're the branches, and kind of this idea that who we are, it grows out of who he is, that he is the life force that supports us, that our identity and our being and our very nature comes from who he is, and that defines us. And talks about how the branches are pruned based on whether they bear fruit or not, and cut out if they're not bearing fruit, and they're pruned so that they're encouraged to bear more fruit if they're already fruitful. And I really want to break down that idea and bring it into the context of us and our lives, and how sometimes we can really be striving to accomplish things and striving to get things done, but we're just not seeing the fruit and we're not being fruitful, versus really resting in God and abiding in God and allowing him to guide our lives and doing things out of his strength, and how we often are much more fruitful and much more peaceful and able to do a lot more without it straining us, do a lot more without it draining us as well, and really breaking that down. So I really want to start off by just reading through John 15 together and kind of talking about it and breaking it down from there. So if we start in John 15 at the very beginning, this is Jesus talking, and he says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it will bear even more fruit. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown in the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples." So that's verse 1 all the way down to verse 8. So I want to break that down a little bit more. There's a few different parts of even just those 8 verses, and this section about the vine and the branches goes on for 17 verses, but even just in that first paragraph, there's already so much depth and detail in that part that we can unpack. So the first part I want to unpack is verses 1 to 2, where it says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful." Now, there's a little add note at the bottom that says, an alternative, the Greek for he prunes, also means he cleans. And this really makes sense more in verse 3, where it says you are already clean, because then we can substitute you are already pruned in there, and that makes it a little bit more sense. But let's just go back to verse 1 and 2 for this moment, just analyze that a little bit more. So I am the true vine, my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. So Jesus is the true vine, and God will cut everything out of Jesus that does not bear fruit. So it doesn't exist. He cuts it off. It doesn't grow anymore. But he prunes the branches that are healthy and fruitful so that they bear more fruit. Now, if you are familiar with gardening and how that works, when you prune a plant, it will grow back where you pruned it to. So it actually promotes growth in that place, and you can use pruning as a way to stimulate growth and stimulate the plant to grow. So a lot of people will do this with flowering plants in particular, where after it flowers and the flowers drop off for that season, they'll actually prune back the stalks so that it encourages the plant to reflower. It encourages those stalks to grow again next season instead of the plant becoming dormant. And that's exactly what he's referring to in this. He's saying that I'm going to completely cut out the branches that aren't bearing fruit. They're dead. They're no longer thriving. But with the branches that are bearing fruit, I'm going to prune them so that it encourages them to bear even more fruit. That the branches one branch will split into two branches, and that it will become even more fruitful. And you'll see this all the time in orchids. They're pruning back apple trees. They're pruning back different types of trees and vines, encouraging the vine or the tree to grow more fruit, that it's more fruitful, and that the orchid in total produces more produce. So we can really then understand what he's trying to say when he's saying this, that, every branch that does bear fruit, I've pruned it so that it'll be even more fruitful. God blesses the things in us that are fruitful so that they become even more abundant. But the branches in Jesus that were not fruitful, he completely cut out so that they're not even present in him. And then we look at verse 3, which talks about us. So it says, you are already pruned because of the word I have spoken to you. You are already pruned. So sometimes we really feel like I need to do so much. I need God to prune me. I need God to fix me, to correct me. And it's a mindset that, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense that we would need God to guide us and to prune us so that we're more fruitful. But this is really interesting because it says actually that you are already pruned. And that means that you're already fruitful. There's already branches in you that are fruitful that he has pruned so that he is encouraging more fruit to be born on your branches. We are the branches that have been pruned, but we cannot bear fruit unless we remain in him. And it says that. It says no branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. So he's saying, I've pruned you and I've encouraged you to be more fruitful, but be careful. You're not going to actually be able to be fruitful unless you're abiding in me, unless you are living your life resting in me. Your identity is attached to mine. You're growing out of my essence and who I am. And that's really where the difference comes in of striving versus abiding in God. So often we recognize that you've been pruned, you've been encouraged to be fruitful, that's part of our nature and part of our heritage as sons and daughters of God. But then we take that identity and we try and live that identity outside of God and outside of his covenant and covering and outside of his identity. And we wonder why we are struggling and striving so hard and trying to do the right thing and make things work. And we're still just not fruitful. We're not able to accomplish the things. Nothing ever seems to go right. We're trying so hard and we always seem to fail. When we're trying to do things outside of God, we're doing them out of our own strength. And we can burn out and we're not getting the reward. And it's biblical. It's God's told us what the problem is. And it's because we're not abiding in him. We're a branch, and branches can only survive when they're attached to the vine that's feeding them. The food, the life source, comes not from the fruit, which often we think it does. That's just the byproduct. The life source actually comes from the vine to which we're attached. God and Jesus are the living water that feed us and fuel our life. And if we remove ourselves from that, we have nothing fueling us except our own strength, and we're going to burn out, and we're only going to be able to work to our cognitive capacity and work to our physical strength and our limitations. But if we're attached to the vine, guess what? All of the nutrients that go into the vine are accessible to us. and he's going to cut out every branch that's not bearing fruit. He doesn't want our resources to be wasted on those things, and he's going to encourage fruit to grow where he's called it to grow, encourage fruit to grow where we are already being fruitful, and that causes us to be fruitful and multiply. And it's a really big eye-opener to understand why sometimes certain areas of our life we can feel like we're trying so hard and nothing's happening, nothing's progressing, nothing's moving forward. We're always failing. We never reach true satisfaction. We never reach true happiness. And it's because we're not resting and abiding in Him. The resources that we're using are our own resources. We're not able to be fruitful because we're not, our identity doesn't mean anything outside of Him. It only means something when we're attached to Him. And if we're taken off Him, it says, if you do not remain in me, this is verse 6, you are like a branch that's thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown in the fire and burnt. You're going to wither away and you're going to die. And what do you do with a branch that's not fruitful and die? You cut it off and you throw it in the fire. It's not helpful. And you don't want that to be a representation of your life. You want that to be a representation of the unhealthy things in your life, but not your whole life. But that's a warning that God and Jesus is trying to give us, saying that this is what will happen to you if you're trying to live your life outside of me and outside of what I'm feeding you and fueling you with, the living water. And when we try and do things outside of God, we are doing them out of our own strength, and we are going to burn out. And you're going to wonder, why am I not seeing the fruit even though I'm putting in all the effort, all the hours? And it's because we're trying to work it out of our own strength. And that's what striving is. Striving is pushing always towards this goal. If you're abiding in God, guess what? He's going to be pruning you. He's going to be chopping you. You don't need to be striving, because He's going to do that for you. And He's going to give you clues about what He's cutting out and what He's promoting. And He's going to open doors and start pruning you in places that you didn't realize that could be pruned and promoted even more. And He's going to be cutting things out that you didn't know needed to be cut out. And He's going to do all those things. And He's going to be the gardener, like it says in verse 1. You don't need to be striving and figuring that out. You don't need to be trying to prune yourself, because there's a gardener who's willing to do it for you. Yeah, there's a gardener that knows what you need to be and how you need to act and what needs to be encouraged and what needs to be discouraged. And He knows all those things. And He's able to look at the bigger picture of how everything works together. And that's only going to happen, though, if you allow yourself to be a branch on His vine. If you don't try and pull away from your true identity and say, I'm a branch and I can be a branch over here and I don't need that. I don't need that vine. I can bear my own fruit, without recognizing the source of where that fruit actually comes from. If you remain in me, verse 7, if you remain in me and my words remain in you. So that's the fuel that He's talking about. Ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourself to be my disciples. So He's saying, if you are abiding in Him and being a branch on His vine, that His words are fueling you, you'll be able to ask for whatever you wish, and it will be given to you. Now, a lot of people read that verse and ask themselves, how come I've been praying for all these things and they haven't come to me? How come I've been asking for these things in God's name and they haven't come for me? And I think a really big thing to always remember is that God doesn't say, I'm going to give you everything you ask for. He says, I'm going to give you everything you ask for that aligns with my will and that aligns with my identity and aligns with my nature. And the reason that He's saying that in this verse is because He's saying, you're remaining in me, you're abiding in me, and my words are within you. My identity is within you. My knowledge, my character is within you, and you're requesting things from me out of that. And you're requesting things from me knowing who I am and what's on my heart. And so of course I'm going to give them to you, because what you want, I also want. And that's what He's saying. It will be done for you because I also want those things. And I want to partner with you towards accomplishing those things. If you're asking God, I want to be really fruitful in this area, and that aligns with what He wants for you, He's going to prune that branch for you. He's going to allow you to be more fruitful. And it says that this is a sign almost to showing people that you are actually one of his disciples, because it says, this is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourself to be my disciples. It's actually a sign of whether or not you have a healthy relationship with God, about whether or not you are fruitful in your life. And so this can be really helpful to ask yourself, am I actually abiding with God and living my life the way God wants me to live my life? Well, an easy way to see whether or not that's true is by how fruitful your life is. And it can be really disheartening to look at your life and realize you've been striving for so long and have little fruit to show for it. But I think it's so important, because without recognizing the truth, how can you ever change? How can you ever change unless you actually become insightful and awoken to that fact that, hey, I've actually been a branch trying to grow my own things for so long now. I actually need to come back to the true vine so that I can get fed properly and be pruned properly by the gardener, so that I can be fruitful, because I've been trying for so long. I've been trying to prune myself. I've been trying to be a good gardener myself, but I don't know how. And humbling yourself and coming to him out of that humility, and he will accept you back into his arms with grace. That's what he wants for us. That's how we're designed to live. We're designed to live out of his vine. It's part of our identity. That's who he's called us to be. And that's a sign that we are living a healthy life with him, is by how much fruit we're bearing. God encourages us. God says, if you are keeping my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. So we can have the same kind of relationship with God that Jesus did by keeping his commands and remaining in his love. And so that's telling us, if you keep my commands, you will remain in my love. Now he's talking as well about my words remain in you, if you remain in me. So the same phrasing is trying to say that the vine is actually a vine of his love as well. So if you're keeping his commands by being a branch, and you're remaining in his love and being attached to his love, you will have the same relationship with God that Jesus had with God. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that something that we should be all trying to accomplish and achieve? Because I don't know about you, but I want that intimacy with God, that relationship with God, to the same level that Jesus had with him. And he's saying it's possible. It's possible if you're letting yourself rest and abide and being a branch on his vine and keeping his commands and loving, it says, loving each other as I have loved you. That's his command, it says. This is my commands. I've told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is love one another as I've loved you, and you will remain in my love. That's it. That's all you have to do. And that's all that we need to do to be fruitful, loving other people as he has loved us, abiding and resting in his love for us as well. And that's going to be the life source, the fuel for us to be able to love others and for us to then be fruitful in what we're doing in the world in order to love others better, in order to glorify God, like it says. And we're actually, if you look in verse 16, we're actually called and appointed to bear fruit. That's actually our calling, something that we have been asked, or is our identity, that we're being called to bear fruit. It's a characteristic that has been appointed onto us. So verse 16, it says, you did not choose me, but I chose you and I appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit. So he's actually called us and set this as our identity, as people who bear fruit that will last, he continues, so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give to you. So again, he's saying that not only will you bear fruit, but I've actually called and encouraged and appointed you to bear fruit. This is your identity. So if you're ever asking, who am I? Why am I here? What am I meant to do in my life? You know it. It says right here, I've appointed you to bear fruit. And what is bearing fruit? Bearing fruit is loving each other as I've loved you, abiding in his love, resting in his love, and remaining in his love, and allowing that to shape your identity. That's what he has encouraged you to do. And doing those things will make you bear fruit. It's not complicated. Love others as I've loved you, and remain in my love, and you will bear fruit. That's all you have to do. And so that's for you to go away and ask yourself, how am I loving others at the moment? And am I loving them in a way that Jesus loved them? Am I being pure and righteous towards them? Am I being unconditional in my love? Am I being generous? Or am I being selfish? Am I being prideful in my love? Am I always asking myself what's in it for me? These are characteristics of not living in and resting in his love and not following his command of loving others if I've loved you. And he's saying that if that's the kind of love that you're living out of and that's what you're allowing to fuel your life, you're not going to be fruitful. Whereas if you're loving people in an unconditional way, a selfless way, a generous way, you're respecting them, you see their worth and their value as God sees them, and you recognize that God loves you equally as much as he loves them, you're going to be fruitful. You're going to allow that love to fuel your life, and you're going to be fruitful, and he's going to cut everything out of you that's not bearing fruit, that's not healthy for you, that's using your resources, and he's going to promote all your resources to go into the branches of you that are bearing fruit. Now that we have a little bit more clear understanding of what we're called to do and the difference between striving for something and striving to accomplish something versus just resting and abiding in God, I want you to ask yourself these questions. Firstly, what is God pruning in your life? And second one, what is he cutting out of your life? So what is he pruning? What is he promoting in your life? What is he calling to bear more fruit? And what is he cutting out of your life? What does he know is unhealthy? What does he know is using your resources unnecessarily? What does he know is toxic to you? So what is he pruning and what is he cutting out? And so we know that we've already been pruned so that we will produce fruit. We have already been pruned, it says that, but you can then remove yourself from the vine and then become unfruitful. So I want you to recognize that God has already started pruning you, and God has already tried to promote and encourage growth in the areas of your life that he knows will be fruitful, and already cut out things that aren't good. But we can then remove ourselves from the vine and then try and survive outside of his love and outside of that thing that's supporting us and outside of that thing that is feeding us and fueling us. And that's when we're going to become unhealthy again. We're not going to have the resources to grow the fruit, and we're going to maybe try and put our resources through everything because we're not cutting the wrong things out of our life. And we really need to be asking ourselves those questions. Am I resting in God, abiding in his love? And what is God pruning in my life, and what is he cutting out of my life? The next thing I want you to do is really ask yourself whether your life is fruitful, and whether you notice that you're bearing fruit in your life, or whether you recognize there is a lack of fruit in your life, and whether that means you need to be coming back to God to stop striving in your own strength, stop trying to accomplish everything out of your own strength and pursuing the wrong things, and just give it all to God. Just come back to him, rest in him, rest in his love, allow that to fuel you, and allow him to do the gardening and do the pruning and do the cutting and give you the strength and the resources to go on, instead of you trying to do things in your own strength. For when I am weak, then I am strong. You know, he says he will always provide the strength for us. We don't need to think and provide that strength for ourselves. That's his role as the gardener. That's his role as our living water, as our life supply. And if you're feeling burnt out, if you feel like you're constantly going in circles or you're never moving forward, I want you to really evaluate whether you are trying to survive outside of him, or whether you're really attached to that living vine and you're allowing that to fuel you, and you're allowing him to prune you and be your gardener. So I hope that this really helps to encourage those thoughts, and that you get some really great revelations out of this passage. I definitely encourage you to go and really sink and read this passage a few times, because there's a lot of information in this. It's 17 verses, it's not very long, but the depth of this, you can go back and read it again and again and get something new out of it every time. So I really encourage you guys to go and spend some time with God and really dig into those verses and really find out who he's called you to be as a branch in him, and what things he's pruning in your life, and what things he's encouraging growth in your life, and how you can remain more in him than you were before. So thank you guys for listening to this episode. I hope that you all stay safe in this time, these crazy times where things are very turbulent and very up and down. A lot of people are uncertain, but I really just pray for everyone out there that we'll all get through this, and all we need to do is rest in God and abide in God, and he says we'll be fruitful and he will supply our needs. We don't need to worry about how He's going to supply our needs in these times. So thank you all for joining, and everyone stay safe, and talk to you guys next week. Bye.